Keith Green was a pioneer in Christian and Jesus music, touching countless lives with his soulful piano melodies and heartfelt lyrics. With songs like Soften Your Heart and Oh Lord You're Beautiful, he was riding a wave of growing fame. But on July 28, 1982, tragedy struck when Keith took his plane for a sightseeing tour across his ranch, promising 8 children, including his own, an unforgettable experience. However, shortly after takeoff, the unthinkable happened. Join us as we explore the incredible journey of Keith Green, from his meteoric rise to his untimely demise. Keith Gordon Green was born on October 21, 1953, near Brooklyn, New York. When he was just 9 months old, his mother, a singer herself, already noticed his musical potential when she realized Keith could hum Rockabye Baby in perfect pitch. And a year after this, his family moved to California, settling in the San Fernando Valley near Hollywood, a place that would later play a significant role in Keith's career. Keith's parents introduced him to music from an early age, encouraging him to play the ukulele at 3 and the guitar at 5. By the time he was 7, Keith was taking piano lessons and even appeared in his first TV commercial. Although he favored the piano, he found classical pieces long and boring, so instead of reading sheet music, he pretended to sight read during his lessons, but he actually memorized the pieces. By the age of 8, Keith had written his first song, and by 11, he had secured a 5-year recording contract with Decca Records, singing his own songs. Decca Records planned to make Keith a teen idol, featuring him in teen magazines and on popular television shows like The Steve Allen Show. But despite these efforts and some initial success with a single that became popular in Hawaii, the industry found it challenging to market him effectively due to his young age. By the age of 12, Keith had written 10 more songs, but as Donny Osmond soon became the new favorite among young fans, Keith was quickly forgotten by the public. By the age of 14, feeling overlooked and considering himself a failure, Keith faced significant disappointment, which was tough for someone who had been groomed to be a pop star his entire life. Disillusioned by what he felt was a failed music career, he decided at the age of 15 that he needed to get as far away from LA as $175 and an old van could take him. He began experimenting with wacky tobacco and became increasingly dependent on psychedelics in hopes of finding spiritual enlightenment. But that was not it, as he also became interested in Eastern mysticism and the free love culture of 1960s America. Then one day, Keith was picked up by the police, and his parents declined to bring him home, thinking a night in jail might teach him a lesson. However, Keith was still Keith, using his time in jail to write songs, using the heel of his shoe to scribble lyrics on the cell wall. Keith grew up reading about Jesus in the Bible and was surprised to learn as a teenager that he was actually Jewish, something his family had never told him. By 1972, Keith had explored various paths in his quest for meaning, including vegetarianism, Buddhism, tarot cards, astrology, Eastern mysticism, and the Rosicrucian order of the occult, but nothing brought him the fulfillment he was looking for. But then, at the age of 19, Keith met Melody, a fellow musician and seeker. The two quickly became inseparable and married a year later, continuing on their spiritual journey together. At this point, Keith had almost given up all hope, but everything changed when they attended a Bible study in Beverly Hills. During this session, which was filled with teaching and guitar-led worship, the couple felt God's presence truly for the first time. This experience, where they heard the gospel and learned about Jesus as a Jewish rabbi, deeply impacted them. In December 1972, Keith wrote in his diary, "Jesus, you are hereby officially welcomed into me." What first confused him regarding his upbringing and hidden religion suddenly clicked as Keith proudly told the world, "I'm a Jewish Christian." And that was not it. As Keith and Melody opened their hearts to Jesus, they also opened their home to anyone in need, including recovering addicts, bikers, the homeless, and pregnant women seeking shelter. Their initial 3-bedroom home eventually housed 14 people, with another living in the garage. But soon their own home became too small, prompting them to rent 6 more houses in the same neighborhood. At one point, it is believed they were providing housing for 75 people across these homes, which they collectively called the greenhouse, a place where people could grow. In 1977, they founded the nonprofit religious organization Last Days Ministries. Keith was now 21 and never looked back. But it wasn't just Keith's life that changed drastically. He was already a skilled musician and songwriter, but now his songs also took on a new direction, reflecting the joy and excitement of finding Jesus and experiencing a transformed life, as seen in his album, No Compromise. Keith attracted large crowds but saw himself as more than an entertainer. He considered himself a messenger of God. His quest for stardom was finally over, and having found the truth, he wanted everyone else to discover it too. He disliked charging for concerts and didn't want to profit from his ministry, which he defined as giving time, talents, and resources to bless and help others. After experimenting with various funding methods, he found peace with one idea: making his concerts free so that anyone who wanted to attend could do so. And by 1980, Keith's pay-what-you-can policy extended to his record sales. With his albums at the top of the charts, Keith decided to give his music away for whatever people could afford, even for free. His goal was to ensure that everyone, especially those who couldn't afford it, had access to his music, and over 200,000 albums were sent to prisons and the poor at no charge. Keith's childhood dream of becoming a superstar had been replaced with a deeper desire to serve God. Fellow Christian musician Randy Stonehill once shared, "Most of the time, Keith acted as if he knew his time on earth was short, and he wanted to make the most of it for the kingdom." And on this note, Keith decided to move the entire community to Texas. In 1982, a few weeks after releasing his fourth album, Songs for the Shepherd, Keith invited a missionary family to stay with them in their flourishing ministry on a 120-acre ranch in East Texas. One afternoon, he promised their children a plane ride, and as expected, the kids were thrilled and looked to their parents for permission. "Please?" they asked with hopeful eyes. "Oh, all right," their father John responded. Keith's charity, Last Days Ministries, had leased 2 planes for concert tours, and one of them was a 7-seat 1973 Cessna 414 twin-engine plane. At one point, Keith wanted to fly the planes himself, but couldn't yet. However, he had met a pilot, Don Burmeister, at a Bible study in 1972. Don was a former Marine aviator who had left the service as a captain and was transitioning to civilian life. Keith asked him if he could build a hangar and airstrip at his house, and once everything was finished, eventually become the pilot for his planes. Don was over the moon when Keith gave him the offer, but he was new to this particular plane. He had only 59 hours of flight time in it, with just 3 hours as the pilot in command. Moreover, Last Days Ministries insurance required specific training and familiarization levels for anyone to be a pilot in command, and Don had not yet completed this training. However, on the early evening of July 28, 1982, Keith was waiting for Don as he returned the ministry's Cessna 182, which he had flown to Dallas after waking up super early that morning. Keith waited until Don got out of the smaller airplane and with his persuasive personality, convinced him to make another flight with the Smalley family. And even though he was tired and hungry, Don agreed. Everyone at the ministry had been fasting for the upcoming concert crusades, adding to the already tense atmosphere. Don had never flown the Cessna 414 alone before, since his previous 3 hours in the left seat were always with another pilot in command. As it turned out, this wasn't the best time for Don to take his first solo flight in this plane, but Keith wanted to show the Smalley family the ranch from the air, and Don didn't want to disappoint them. So on that hot Texas evening, Keith, his 3-year-old son Josiah, his 2-year-old daughter Bethany, pilot Don Burmeister, John Smalley, his wife Deidre, and their 6 children, a 12-year-old, 2 7-year-olds, 2 4-year-olds, and a 3-year-old, boarded the 7-seat Cessna 414 with registration number N110VM for a sightseeing trip around the property. You can imagine how cramped it must have been in a plane with only 7 seats. There weren't even enough seatbelts for 12 people. It's also important to note that Keith's wife, who was 6 weeks pregnant at the time, and their 1-year-old daughter Rebecca stayed home. Before boarding, Keith told his wife, "If I don't come back, raise Rebecca to be a woman of God," a comment she later recalled as coming out of the blue, almost as if he sensed something would go horribly wrong. And tragically, his premonition would become a reality. As the sun began to set on that hot Texas evening, the anticipation was real. Around 7:20 p.m., pilot Don taxied to the end of the 3,500-foot runway and took off for the little sightseeing trip. Worth mentioning is that the plane was equipped with a Robertson STOL kit, which gave it short field takeoff performance. Don lifted off about 2,000 feet down the runway and climbed at a steep angle. But soon Don noticed something was wrong. The plane struggled to gain altitude, and it is believed that he underestimated the weight of the 3 small children on board, mistakenly thinking they equaled the weight of 1 adult. Unbeknownst to him, the plane was overloaded by 450 pounds with full fuel tanks, and the center of gravity was nearly 5 inches off. This imbalance caused the plane to pitch violently up and down. Don fought to control the aircraft, which was dangerously nose-high and difficult to manage. As the plane rotated and struggled to climb for another 4,000 feet, the situation grew dire. Just seconds after taking off, the plane hit the tops of the 30-foot trees just 150 feet beyond the airstrip. Inside the cabin, the kids were likely still buzzing with excitement, unaware of the approaching disaster. But then, the plane crashed into the trees and exploded into flames, taking the lives of all 4 adults and 8 kids aboard. Keith tragically died at the age of 28. Just minutes after the crash, Keith's pregnant wife received a call from her secretary saying the plane had gone down, and she immediately ran outside. As she raced into the woods, a heartbreaking sight unfolded as she cried out for her husband and kids. She later shared, "When I got to the crash site, I just stood there watching, and then I realized they were gone. I remember walking up to the airplane, and the Lord just stopped me, saying, 'Don't look. What do you want to see? What do you want to remember?' And I turned around and just walked away." Just minutes before, she had kissed her husband and 2 kids and wished them fun. Now they were gone. "I wasn't bitter, but I was very mad at Keith for taking the kids, and I think that was probably deflected anger at the Lord," Melody confessed. However, other members of the community did walk further to the crash site, and when they arrived, they found a smoldering, blackened area surrounded by pieces of the burned plane. The scene was eerie and quiet. Trees were broken and scorched, with blackened branches and trunks. Flip-flops from the children were scattered around, and one of the first people to arrive vividly remembered seeing a burned body, still strapped in a seat, with a blackened skull. And as if that wasn't enough, a thunderstorm was approaching the crash site. The sky darkened with dramatic flashes of lightning and loud thunder, and the community believed that God was showing his sorrow through the storm, seeing it as a sign of his grief and anger, adding to the already devastating atmosphere. In the aftermath of the crash, the National Transportation Safety Board found that 8 of the 12 findings were related to pilot error. The crash was caused by the pilot in command allowing the aircraft to be loaded beyond its operational limits. For military pilots, this responsibility typically falls to the military loadmaster, and Don may have, out of habit, overlooked this crucial step. Despite not having a history of recklessness and possessing a track record of smart, careful piloting learned from years of wartime flying in the Marine Corps during Vietnam, Don made a critical error that day with devastating results. Additionally, FAA records indicate that the pilot had very limited experience in training with conventional twin-engine aircraft, as opposed to centerline thrust twin-engine planes. Just a month earlier, he had taken a check ride to remove the centerline thrust restriction on his multi-engine rating, a common step for military pilots. This check ride should have thoroughly assessed his ability to fly a conventional multi-engine aircraft across its full range of operations. However, just days before the accident happened, the FAA examiner who conducted Don's test lost his certification due to incomplete and inadequate examinations. Moreover, the insurance carrier, Ideal Mutual Insurance Company, required that Don would log 1,045 hours of flying time, attend a Cessna ground and flight training course, and log 15 hours in a Cessna 414 before acting as the pilot in command of the leased aircraft. And as mentioned before, with only 59 hours of flight time in the 414, of whom just 3 hours as the pilot in command, Don clearly did not meet these requirements. Ultimately, it was concluded that the aircraft was overloaded by 445 pounds, with its center of gravity 4.26 inches beyond the aft limit. The high air temperature of 90 degrees Fahrenheit created a high density altitude, causing a lower climb rate and increasing the risk of stalling, making the plane nearly uncontrollable. All these factors combined prevented the plane from gaining enough altitude, leading to an immediate crash into the trees at the end of the airstrip. After Keith's tragic death, 2 full albums of his original songs were released posthumously: The Prodigal Son in 1983 and Jesus Commands Us to Go in 1984. On November 27, 2001, Keith Green was posthumously inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. Keith's uncompromising dedication to his faith in music was an inspiration to many, and evangelist Winky Pratney described him as one of the most amazing men of this previous century. Although he is no longer with us, Keith's values and evangelistic spirit live on through his powerful, timeless music.